If you contact that pauper, your father and I will disown you. And when we are gone, you will get nothing. It's not worth spreading disease. People like your Olivia shouldn't reproduce. She should get rid of the baby." The tall and gaunt brunette, who looked like a broomstick, screamed at her son. Samuel didn't look a bit like his mother. He took after his father. Sturdy, short, blue-eyed, and very kind. Calm. Samuel just listened to his mother. But of course, he didn't think about leaving Olivia. They've been in love since childhood. Even though their parents on both sides forbade them from seeing each other, they managed to deceive their disapproving relatives all this time. And now, when his beloved was pregnant, he would never leave her. As for the money his mother threatened to take away, he would earn it, with or without hands and feet. For now, Olivia's grandmother promised to take them in at her tiny house on the outskirts of the forest. The elderly woman lived in a backwoods area, where there wasn't even a proper road. It took about half an hour to walk from the place where the district bus could drop you off. But Olivia was already there, and he would make his way on foot. No one could stop them. "Mom, I respect you a lot, but do you really think you raised such a scoundrel who would trade love and a child's life for some money and property?" "No, you raised a good son," said Sam conciliatorily. He understood that the conflict couldn't be smoothed over, but he felt sorry for his mom and wanted her to know that he loved her. His mother had once escaped poverty herself, and only thanks to a lucky marriage had she made it to the people. It seemed, how could she judge Olivia? Was it his fiancé's fault that she lost her parents early in a fire? There was no one to rebuild the house, so she grew up with her grandmother in the backwoods, albeit in poverty, but also in love. They met in the forest when they were very young. Olivia was picking mushrooms and berries and showed him a clearing where there were plenty of them. And he immediately fell in love and somehow knew that she would be his wife, although he didn't say anything about the girl then. But he began to steal supplies from his parents' pantry and took them to the one he loved with all his heart a couple of times a week. His friend Danny covered for him, making honest eyes and confirming that they went for a walk with the guys to the river and ate half a circle of cheese and several loaves of bread. His mother even asked if they had also devoured a bag of flour and sugar. But there was an excuse here too. Supposedly they were playing winter, and the flour and sugar were instead of snow. Well, now he would be with her forever, and no one would separate them. As for his mother, she still had an older daughter, his sister Emily. She would have what they called the right kind of child. For some reason, Samuel had no relationship with his sister. Emily constantly hated him for something, and he got tired of trying to build a relationship with her and pretending not to notice the hostility. But with his mother, they were inseparable, so they would probably miss him. At night, when everyone fell asleep, Sam quietly, like a shadow, slipped out onto the street and set off on a long journey on his bike. He wanted to take his father's car, but then it wouldn't have been possible to leave unnoticed, and it would make a lot of noise, like he had stolen a valuable item from the house. And what to do with that car later? It would break down halfway, and then what? It would be dismantled for parts, sold, and his father would tear his hair out. Of course, his mom and dad were wealthy and they had more than one car, but they held on to every item, so it wasn't worth leaving the house like that. Samuel reached Olivia and her grandmother at dawn. His slender, blonde fiancée was waiting for him at the porch. Her belly wasn't noticeable yet. The baby was only 3 months old, and if it hadn't been for his sister Emily, who hated Olivia even more than Samuel, snitching to their mother, no one would have known anything. But as it was, something had to be decided anyway. "You came," Olivia exhaled happily. "Could it have been any other way, silly?" Sam took off his sweater and put it on Olivia's shoulders, trembling from the cold. They stared at each other silently for a few minutes, as if not believing their happiness, then went into the house. "So you didn't abandon my granddaughter after all?" grumbled the grandmother, who managed to wake up even though they were quiet and whispering. "Why do you all make me out to be some kind of monster and scoundrel, Grandma?" "I'd never leave Olivia," Sam exclaimed, throwing up his hands. "All right, don't get heated. I have my reasons. I'll tell you today," the grandmother replied, but the sharp icicles in her pale blue eyes seemed to melt. Sam noticed this. It's okay. He would find common ground with the person closest to Olivia. Even though she was difficult and refused to take food from him as a child, forcing him to sneak it in, saying they had more than enough. It was clear that Grandma Agnes lied out of pride. He saw how they lived. The grandmother at her age would go to clean and cook in the nearest cottage settlement, taking Olivia with her. It was clearly not out of a good life. "George, wake up! Sam ran away to his pauper girlfriend's witch grandmother," screamed Rena, waking her husband up in the morning. "Well, you drove the boy away. I told you not to pressure him. Let him marry his Olivia. Live with her. What do you care?" Yuri replied wearily. "As if you don't know that money attracts money. And what kind of genetics will your grandchildren have? Have you thought about that?" Rena retorted indignantly. "The grandchildren will be fine. Olivia's parents were decent people. You should be more concerned about your own Chloe. She started drinking with anyone," Yuri said. He noticed that his stepdaughter began sneaking out and not always coming back sober. Ira went looking for her and wandered around somewhere, which worried him. Chloe was born to Ira from her first husband, who was a real scoundrel and party animal. This topic was not usually discussed, so now Margaret frowned and ran off to do some household chores. She didn't like when someone reminded her of her poor and dangerous youth or childhood. In her dreams, she saw herself at least as a lady, as if she was born with a silver spoon in her mouth. She wanted to appear that way to people, but everyone in the area remembered who and where she came from, so occasionally they reminded her of the unpleasant past. Margaret had long suggested to her husband to sell the farm and move to the city, but he didn't want to, saying, "What kind of life is it without the land you were born on?" Yuri was a simple, kind, and industrious man who loved Margaret in his way, although he didn't understand her at all. He was sure that his wife was just inventing problems out of boredom because she had nothing else to do. Margaret, on the other hand, didn't love anyone in her life. It so happened that her childhood and early youth were filled with many hardships, and no one taught her to love. Her parents drank heavily, and she chose a husband just like them. But she was warm towards her second husband and children as much as possible, and wanted for them what she considered the best: a well-fed, calm life. She had already picked a bride for Samuel with wealthy parents, but what could she explain to that fool? "Well, let them starve to death. I'm not going to them. Let them come to us bowing down," Ira said loudly, so her husband could hear. A couple of hours later, Chloe woke up. She was very happy that her brother had run off to his Olivia, meaning she would get all the inheritance. Chloe wasn't such a bad person, but very jealous and envious. She perfectly understood that she had fewer rights than Sam and compensated for it with insolence, slandering her brother, tarnishing him as much as she could. And now fate had smiled upon her. Her stepfather would leave everything to her. If only her real father would disappear somewhere too, then she wouldn't have to help him hide. This would not end well. She had already started drinking for courage, but what if her stepfather found out? 6 months had passed since Samuel and Olivia had a son. They named him Andrew, according to the church calendar, as suggested by the grandmother. Samuel occasionally called his father, but it wasn't often because the connection was poor. "Son, come back. I'll rebuild the house for you. Don't pay attention to your mother. No one will harm you," his father pleaded. He would have gone to see his son long ago, but he was one of those men who, for some reason, were deathly afraid of their wives. But if Sam came to them, it was like he wasn't to blame. "Dad, we're living here like in a palace, even better. I really hope to see you, but Olivia gave birth not long ago, and I don't want her to be upset. And her grandmother doesn't particularly like you and Mom. Everything will settle down, Dad." Samuel once again learned that his mom didn't even want to hear about him as long as he was living with Olivia. So going home made no sense. Olivia had long been his legal wife, whether anyone liked it or not. They got married secretly before she became pregnant. They just didn't dare live together. "What palace? The roof will soon fall on your head, and you'll starve to death," worried his father. Samuel himself thought he would live in poverty, but on the first day of his arrival, Grandma Agnes said, "Look, I see the guy is reliable after all, so we need to talk while my granddaughter is busy with lunch," she said with a mysterious look. "What's the matter, Grandma Agnes?" Samuel asked, alarmed. He was ready to overcome any difficulties. "Don't be afraid. I'll tell you some good news. Olivia didn't dare, so she asked me to, Grandma replied. And she told a surprising story. It turned out that the entire vast piece of land around the shack, including the one on which the wealthy modern cottage settlement stood, belonged to Grandma Agnes and Olivia. Olivia's father once saved some high-ranking official, and he left him a huge fortune. Everyone thought that Olivia's father worked as the head guard in the settlement, but he was the owner. Then someone set them on fire, and they never found out who. Just in case, I decided to act like we lived poorly. Come with me to the other half of the house, Grandma Agnes suggested. She opened the door with a key, and Sam gasped. He found himself in a space with several rooms, all renovated with modern amenities. There was a bathroom, air conditioning, and sturdy furniture. Nothing overly fancy or excessively rich, but everything was done in good faith. Do you really think if someone finds out that the settlement belongs to you, they might set it on fire? Sam was surprised. Understand, son, Olivia's mother had a very bad brother, a rogue and a drunkard. So we thought it might have been him. He was sentenced to a long time in prison, escaped and disappeared, but he might reappear. I didn't want to tell you, but it's Oleg, your mother's first husband and Chloe's father. And my son, the grandmother sighed and added, he always hung out with bad people, and I don't know what to do about it. I'm old, and something needs to be done. Olivia's unexpected wealth was another reason Samuel decided not to go to his parents for now. Who knew, maybe Chloe or Mom secretly kept in touch with Oleg, or he with them. Samuel couldn't allow his beloved to be in danger. He pretended to work as the head guard in the cottage settlement while learning everything from Mr. Davis, the late friend of Olivia's father. And he asked Mr. Davis to try to find Oleg through his connections. 6 months later, Mr. Davis said, you were right. He's hanging around your mother and talking to Chloe. My guys saw him. Well, we should report this to the police and let them deal with him, suggested Samuel. Yes, but we need to lure your mother, father, and sister away because his friends might think they were set up, and then they'll face the same fate as Olivia's parents. You knew they burned immediately after the police caught Oleg by coincidence? Mr. Davis asked. Samuel shook his head negatively. Then he warned Olivia and Grandma Agnes that they would have to invite his parents and sister and explained why. They weren't particularly happy, but agreed. I'm not going to those paupers. What a shame that we have such relatives, Chloe said when she found out that her brother had invited her and their parents to visit. And I would gladly spit in Olivia's face. Let that pauper know her place, thinking she could latch on to the son of wealthy parents, said Margaret. All right, enough talk. Samuel said either we all go or no one goes, said George. Mom, brother has lost his mind. Some bum is setting terms for decent people. I changed my mind. I'm going to teach him a lesson, said Chloe. Here's what I thought. Let's go a day earlier so they don't have time to prepare it all. Imagine, they're starving with a crust of bread for 4, and here we come with food. We'll have a laugh, suggested Margaret. George didn't hear this part of the conversation and naively believed that his wife and daughter were leaving early to see Sam and his little son sooner. He happily agreed. Samuel was at work that day, and Olivia brought him lunch and took little Andrew with her. She always tried to spend as much time with her husband as possible. Grandma Agnes went to the forest for medicinal herbs. Her heart started acting up again. The guests were expected to arrive the next day, as everyone thought, so no one expected them. Is anyone in the palace? Margaret shouted sarcastically and knocked on the old door that had settled quite a bit. Margaret, stop it, will you? Her husband scolded. But his wife and daughter had already run into the first part of the house and saw no signs of food or comfort. Apparently they went begging. Hopefully, they'll be back soon, said Chloe. Suddenly, Margaret smelled the aroma of delicious food from behind a door that led somewhere else. It was ajar. Margaret decided to take advantage of the host's absence and find out more details about their lives, so she could gossip and sneer later. She opened the door that led to the inner part of the shack and, clutching her heart, began to sink to the floor. What's there? George asked, frightened. And when he too ran into the far part of the house, he was amazed. In front of him was a rich apartment with beautiful finishes and quality furniture, and they found themselves right in the living room, which was combined with the kitchen. There was a lot of delicious food on the table, fruit, and the huge German refrigerator was clearly not empty. What is this? George was surprised. Dad, why didn't you warn us? He heard his son's voice behind him. Everything seemed unrecognizable. The boy had matured even more, and Olivia had blossomed and become more beautiful. In her arms was a cute, very well-groomed, rosy-cheeked baby who looked very much like Sam and George himself, the same blonde and strong. When Samuel, Grandma Agnes, Olivia, and Mr. Davis explained why they had called them there was an awkward pause. "So you haven't been in touch with your ex all this time?" George asked his wife sternly. "Dad, he forced us to help him. Otherwise, he threatened that something would happen to you in our home," Chloe answered for her mother. They were glad that Oleg was finally returned to a distant place. Chloe and Margaret no longer knew where to go from the dangerous person, but for some reason they were afraid to tell their father. "Don't worry, my guys will take care of everything. They wanted to set your property on fire, but it didn't work out. I won't let that happen a second time," Mr. Davis promised. And he explained that Oleg's plan was simple. He wanted to win back his ex, make her a rich widow, and get access to the money. But Margaret turned out to be a decent woman, and that saved everyone. "So it's good that I got mad at Samuel and didn't go to them earlier." Margaret was pleased to have done at least something right. "But usually I close the door. Something just clicked this time," said Grandma Agnes. She knew that Oleg and his accomplices had tried to escape from the police and ended up dying. So now no one threatened anyone except for the usual envy and jealousy. Actually, Oleg was her son and her cross to bear, and she would bury him, but she would tell everyone about it later. Mr. Davis promised to keep everything secret for now. And Chloe, after all, was her granddaughter. She needed to establish some kind of relationship with her. And Margaret, her former daughter-in-law, she shouldn't have stopped communicating with her after she called her a pauper. Of course, it's unlikely that we'll become one big family, but at least maintaining neutrality is worth it. But that's for later. Right now, I need to brew some herbs for my heart. It's pounding wildly.